Perfect. Welcome everyone to our virtual session, our Rethink Corporate Culture session, this time with number 9 already. And today with Brijesh, who will be talking about how to use organizational identity to transform corporate culture. Let me introduce to you real quick who is Brijesh. So Brijesh has over 25 years of experience in the topics of innovation, transformation, as well as organizational development. He worked across Asia as well as Europe and really helps organization in their transformation to be successful in what he's called, or generally is being called, Industry 4.0. And he focuses especially on balancing also the digital and the human aspect within that transformation. So I'm really glad to have Brijesh here with us today and would hand over to him for the presentation.
Thanks, Mark. So I hope everybody can see my screen at this point of time. So this should be a color explosion with organizational identity and culture transformation.
That worked fine, yes.
Fantastic. So welcome everyone again. So thanks again, Mark, for the very nice introduction. I think simply put, what I like to work is, the way I like to call it, is at the intersection of digital and human. I think in today's world, there's a lot more focus going on digital, and we forget a lot of times that it's humans who drive digital. And culture, as we all know, is becoming more and more important, especially in today's world when we're going through a COVID, a huge transformation of how organizations work and what we think about work. And that's why for me, the topic of how we use organizational identity, and we're going to delve into this a little bit more, we can use that to drive culture transformation. Mark already talked about my background. Apart from what he said, is I also have a personal side. I also am the author of science fiction books for children. So, apart from having worked across these companies, Credit Suisse, GE, and a few other places. So if any one of you get bored during the presentation, which I hope is not the case, you can always browse the thing about. So for me, what's important is that helps to keep my creativity going. And that's something that I realized, that for Brijesh to have a clear identity, I need to be able to balance all the aspects of my personality. And to me, that's a theme that becomes important about how do we drive culture. So if we were to go and now start moving towards this combination of identity and culture. Now, a quick thing, when first I was introduced to the concept of identity and culture, I was fascinated by the fact that we had been overlooking the people's own identity aspect when we were talking about corporate culture. Because on its own, a corporation is made up for people, and a lot of people used to say that when you're focusing on culture, we need to focus on just on the systems and the overall thing around it. And identity, and research has proven that unless you focus on identity, which starts with a person's identity, who's a part of the organization and moves forward, we cannot really get the full cultural transformation going on. So, dwell forward, what is identity, right? I'm going to start with an example of a company that I worked for many years ago. This was in late 90s and early 2000, a company called GE, which at that point of time was the world's most admired company. For many years, their organization satisfaction, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction was at the top of the scales. One of the biggest market caps at that point of time. And people really used to wonder, what keeps the company going? Now, Jack Welch, who was the visionary CEO, and I had a chance to meet him twice, and you could see that spark in his eyes about, this is what it is. So when I look back at GE, what was the identity of GE at that point of time? I worked with them for 6 years, and speaking to a lot of people, even today, who are working for GE, there's one thing that stands out. For somebody who works at GE, they used to relate their identity to these 3 words, saying, I am successful. I, Brijesh Luthra, who work in the company, am successful. And the company would say, yes, so the focus was on I, if you want to call it. And there were a few systems that used to keep this identity running. So there was this fantastic force ranking system, 2080, 2070, 10. A lot of us might be, would have lived through that system or are actually driving that system within our organization. And they had a fantastic series of monetary rewards that would keep reinforcing the fact that if you're successful as a person, you are valuable to us. And then what we started seeing was globally, and regardless of culture, and that's an interesting aspect, is that the behaviors which people would show more and more often compared to the others was what we call as presence and initiative. People would want to be present, people would want to show that they're taking an initiative, and, very interesting enough, advertise their success. So people used to spend close to 15 to 20% of their time advertising this success in different shapes or forms within the organizations. And the external image that the company had at that point of time was it's a fast and furious company. It's a company that will get results done. It will show things get done. It will meet all customers' expectations, get you a profit, and themselves make a profit. Now, again, all this was driven by the identity people had. And a lot of this was shared by values, and we're going to get to that in a minute, saying that I, as a person, want to show that I'm successful. So people's identity, sense of satisfaction, if you will, hinged on this feeling. Now, if you move over to culture, and culture is, again, one of the fuzziest words that I've come across. A lot of us lead cultural transformation is, what is culture? Right? And this is, if you come to ask somebody to define culture, you'll get a million different answers because you can never feel it. You only feel culture when things start going not as well as you thought. And that's been my experience. When things are going well, everyone's happy and people take culture for granted. But when it's not, we start to feel what is culture. So for me, culture is based on what I call as the values and the belief system. The fundamental base of a company culture, or even at home or a country, if you will, is based on the fact that what are my values? What are the organizational values that the company is propagating? And what are the beliefs that I come with? On top of that, what companies then lay down is certain behaviors that I, as a person, based on my values, I display certain behaviors. This could be a wide range. How a company takes decisions. What is driving the decision-making process of the company, which is, again, links a lot to the values and the fundamental beliefs that a company or management team or the people running that company got. And on top of that, you lay down certain systems which hold everything together. Now, this, in some way, adds up to this fuzzy thing that we call culture. So culture exists because the company wants to follow a particular set of values or beliefs. People who are coming into the company, they believe in those values. They can relate to those values, and they bring in a set of values which could be coherent or adding to that. And using our beliefs, we have a system of behaviors, decision, and various systems that come in, and that forms the culture of the company. Now, this also holds true for countries. I currently live in Switzerland. I've lived in Budapest, China, India, and worked a bit in the USA. And what I realize is that all of the culture, when you think of a culture of a company, I'll take an example of Switzerland right now. Switzerland, I have come to believe that Switzerland, the culture is about democracy, about making sure that everyone's opinion is heard. And it started from the way the country emerged and the kind of values people believe in, saying that I don't want to be a hero. And this permeates down into the way the entire country, and which relates exactly to how a company would work. Now, let's take another example, which is how, and if you were to link it all together, I think identity answers a fundamental question of who am I? Or who are we as a country or a company? Because people have to relate to a concept or a sense of feeling or belonging. So identity answers that very simple question. How does it relate to culture? Because culture then becomes this fuzzy little thing, this amoeba, if you will, which continuously changes shapes at all given point in time, is how we as a company act, think, and feel. So there's my identity. I come into the company has a specific identity of our own. Now, what happens is that my identity as a person, and of 10,000, 6 people or 1,000,000 people that work for a company or a country, it is embedded into the culture of that organization. And then there's a reverse effect, if you will, where the culture reinforces the identity of the people and how they perceive it. No, I think the important thing is how the perception happens. And it's a bit of a loop. It's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I bring in identity to the company, or I join the company because I think that company has a specific identity. I embed myself. I influence the culture. The culture, as I perceive it, influences me to behave in a particular way, because that's what we just saw, that it links to the beliefs and the value system. And that impacts my identity, and it keeps changing, and it's a circle which keeps going. What it does is this combination then projects an image to the outside world. It's how outside the world, customers, our families, clients, shareholders, stakeholders perceive an image of the company based on the culture and the identity, which is producing the results, and the image is formed. And interestingly enough, this also holds true for people. When I am trying to project a particular identity, people outside my team or within my team, they perceive a specific image that I'm trying to project. And that in terms could be, to a large extent, of course, there are people who are exceptions to the fact, and they may not always conform to this model, but the identity culture idiom, if you will, of that combination leads to the image that a company has of the organization. And that's what GE was. If you think back to the example that I gave a few minutes ago, GE's image was a fast and a furious company, driven by identity of your people who thought that, hey, I am a successful person. And that influenced the way people behaved and the culture. If you were to take now another example, which is on the extreme opposite, it's a company called Zürcher Kantonalbank. It's Switzerland's third largest bank. Now, interestingly enough, if you were to go out and ask people outside Switzerland and think of Swiss banks, this name will never come up. Never. Anyone outside in Switzerland will have hardly heard of this company's name, and let's see why. The identity of this company is built on this simple belief: we succeed together. If I work in the company, I'm driving my identity of saying that I only succeed if we succeed together as an entire organization. If you now break it down to the systems, behaviors, and the image that it projects. So the systems that the companies put together is, and this is fascinating, they have no individual targets if you go level of n-4. And this is fascinating for a company that has approximately 7,000 people that work for them. Close to 5,500 people do not have an individual annual target. They only have team bonus pools. So it's the manager's role to make sure, so the manager's got a target. So if you're an individual performer in the organization, you do not have an individual target. So what that drives is that my sense of self-worth is driven by the fact that I help others succeed, because only then I will succeed, because I'm not going to be measured individually. And the behaviors that you see within a company, I had a chance to work for this company on a project where we were actually going through this removal of the force ranking systems and the removal of individual targets, is the behaviors that are rewarded and that people say is creating a consensus. We do not move forward till the time we have a consensus on a specific topic. So it's not one person which is driving the company's direction or the strategy. It's a consensus model. And it's fascinating to see that how can a country's third largest bank can work like this. And the other aspect, which again I found fascinating, is that it's respecting others' feelings. And this is not about not opening up. It's not about hiding my feelings behind a curtain so that I don't have to speak up and I'm not the bad person. It's really about a process of discussion where I go through a process of decision making, where I consciously find a way of respecting others' feelings. And what this adds up to is an image of safe and risk-free company for investors, for clients who bank with them, and also for employees who work in that company. They go back with an image saying that I'm working for an organization which is safe and risk-free. And this translates into the kind of feeling and the culture, and then the overall culture that comes together is low resistance, very low friction, a lack of entropy, as I like to call it. And that's something that I realized when I worked with them for close to a year, that there is a lack of an entropy in the company, saying that things and entropy, as some of you will know, is a fundamental factor of the universe. It exists in all human beings, things, that things deteriorate over time. And what I was amazed to see was this apparent lack, or to a very low extent, of entropy that exists in their organization because of this fundamental identity that people have, people relate to. It's saying, we succeed together. I can only succeed if the entire organization succeeds together. Now, two completely different cultural examples. One is an I-focused culture, GE, and a we-focused culture, Zuckerkamp. Now, I'm not saying one is bad or worse. Both companies were immensely successful and still continue to be, but it's a matter of how a culture that I build within the organization. Now, to me, that's how this entire thing is driven. What I'd like to have now, I'd like to take a minute to have your thoughts on what you think about your identity and your company's image. So if you could go to the Mentimeter, you will have two questions. One question is about how clear you are about your identity. If you take, on a scale of 1 to 10, if you find time to find that Mentimeter screen that must be open on your screen, answer this question for yourself. And Mark, you may need to help people in case there's an issue, a technical issue. And then there's a second question as well, if you finish answering that, is, can you describe your company's image as you might see it or an external world might see it in one word?
So we would be now in the first question that I see 7 people have already answered.
Okay.
Brijesh, do you want to share the screen, or shall I quickly share the results?
Well, let me do that, because then it's easier. So
I see 7 answers so far. We're just revealing to whoever has answered already. So we have 7 answers. I know before we had rather 14, 15. So if you go, you can really use the same link and should be able to see the question with the possibility to select the 1 to 10. So we actually still see the slide, Brijesh. So we have another answer in.
Perhaps, do you want to?
I can also quickly share. Yeah, sure. Okay. So we have 9 answers in. So that was the first question, right? How clearly would you be able to describe your organization's identity? I think we see a split a little bit, a few quite lower end, and some one answer really crystal clear.
All right, that's fantastic. I guess in case people have finished answering the question, what I'd love to have some comments in the chat about people who mark themselves as a 1 and 2. Why did you say that you are not able to describe your organization's identity clearly?
So we don't have 1 and 2, we have 3 and 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the 1, 2, 3 is all 0, but then we have on the 3 and 4.
3 and a 4. I would love to see some answers in the chat box, because this is fascinating for me. And after that, I'll tell you a typical results of this survey when this is done as a part of the research projects that I've done, both with the university that I teach and at the work.
So you can use the Zoom chat. Maybe easiest if you have, like, if you're not really clear, maybe also if you're 5, 6, maybe even 7, like, why are you not clear? And also, if you haven't answered yet, you can still answer.
All right, so it looks like there's certain shyness on people's half to be able to come out and share as to why is it that they're not sure of to be able to identify or describe their organization identity. Okay, that's interesting.
Okay, so we see one.
Jean-Luc says there's a discrepancy between official image and lived image. A young business, so identify not clear. That's an interesting one. I'd like to come back to that at the end of the discussion, because it's a fascinating thing to see. So that's 2. How about somebody who said, now I see its scores moved, so perhaps somebody else answered as well. How about people who, okay, so Christian says there's a lot of buzzwords used but not explained. So I would imagine, Christian, you talking about within your company, there are a lot of buzzwords used and not explained. And I'm going to share an example of a company which is on its way to success using, so Christian says, yes, thank you. Okay, so for in the sake of time, what I like to now do is move over to the next question, which is about, can you describe in one word the company's external image?
And I will just leave the results hidden for a few seconds, that we get as unbiased as possible data. Mm-hmm. So we see the first answer is in, second answer coming in. I posted also the link again in the Zoom chat. So this is really the easiest way to just click on it and join the discussion here.
Solid. Prashant says solid. That's the external image of your company, Prashant.
So maybe we wait for 2 or 3 more, so I would then unveil it here. Maybe we show what we have.
All right. Well, David.
So now we have 2 sources, right? We have the chat and the link. The easiest is really if you just use the link, so we have everything on the slide here.
Yeah.
But we get also solid dynamics.
I think while people are answering, so thanks, Mark. I think for me it's interesting is that now this is a bit of a self-reflection that you would need to do, that if somebody says old-fashioned or fast, now there's another thing coming in around innovation, innovative. Now, interestingly enough, so when you say innovative, now there's few other things coming in as well, collaborative. Are all these things a buzzword that you think the company's image is, or is that what you see or hear from your clients if you deal with clients? or people externally? Again, you don't have to answer that. It's really something that for you to think about, because somebody mentioned, and if I'm not wrong, it was Jean-Luc, you mentioned that there's a discrepancy between an official image and a lived image. And you can see the same things coming through. What I'd like to now move, Mark, if you will, and we'll relate to some of these things in a minute. I'd like to go back to sharing my screen so that we can go on to this one. So we saw, so if everybody can see my screen, which is about your thoughts. So we saw that there's a feeling about a discrepancy between the external and the internal image. And that's exactly the example that I want to share with you. Is very often one of the biggest issues that happen with identity is how we mistake identity. So there's an aspirational identity that I will have as a person, and there's a real identity of as people see it within my team. And again, I'm not talking about image, is the identity of how I see it. And let's give you a small example of a company that I worked with as a part of the cultural transformation, where this company was going through a huge transformation. Their aspirational image that they were trying to project to the outside world is that they are a transformation partner. Whereas the real image that the client saw it was they are a technology and operations provider, because that's what they had been for the last 30 years of their existence. Now they were trying to project an image that they want to become an innovative transformation. Digital is the buzzword. Everybody wants to be a digital consulting partner and name you will. They were trying to express an image. When we dug deeper, we found out, and this was fascinating, that within the organization, the aspiration, the real image or the real identity, apologies for choosing the word, the real identity that people of the company had was that they were doers. The identity that the company wanted to have for people to think about, saying that we are thinkers. Everybody's thought was saying that we are just doers, where the company wants them to see themselves as thinkers. And fascinatingly enough, the reason was that aspirationally, the company wanted to drive a culture saying that you should be able to challenge leadership. We want you to fail fast and innovate, right? Standard buzzword, you pick up any design thinking, MIT Sloan management issue. These are the 4 words: fail fast and innovate. People wanted to drive a culture where you look at the bigger picture, connect the dots. You crowd seek, you take an initiative to seek information. And the fact that the process of finding out a result is equally important as a result. But the real culture was command and control, because that's what people were used to. I get an order and I execute it. People were worried and happy more about making incremental improvements, using a lot of analysis. What was rewarded was domain knowledge. If you're good in a specific deep subject, you were rewarded with that. What the culture was saying that people would wait for leaders to cascade knowledge rather than go out and ask people and process. If somebody was spending far too much on process or figuring out a way of doing it and was not achieving results, you were a quote unquote bad or a low performer. Now, this is a fascinating thing. And as you can see, it was a huge clash in terms of a company wants to project a specific image. The people's identity is phenomenally, vastly different from what they want it to be. And the cultural aspects which are driving this identity. And you can see the connection. It's a direct connection. Now, when we started working on a transformation, on how can we transform the company's identity and the culture, there were a few things worked. I think the first one, which was not done in the company for a long, long time, was they had never asked the people to define what identity means to them. Now, that's very important. The company had defined an image, but they had not given time to people to self-reflect and identify what is their identity future state is. And what we did was, and this was a fascinating exercise for the company, that we asked to do it the other way around, 2 ways round. So the leaders would say that as I see identity today and the future, for my employees is this, and the other way around. Now, what that did was it started a dialogue within the company, which had never happened because the focus was always on an image, becoming a digital transformation partner, but the people involved were kind of forgotten over a period of time. What was another fascinating thing that was done was, and this was a bit of a mind frame for the company to get over it, is that we did an analytics of the engagement and sentiment based on the comments. They were using Yammer very extensively. So the kind of comments that people put into communications on that were coming out. And when there was so they developed a self tool. This was a large company. There's a huge number of people. So there were a few people that we put together to do these analytics. And there were two themes that came out. One was fear. People were fearful about what their future place in their organization is. And they had a concern about, they were waiting for directions. So two themes came out. One is fear. If I do something, will I have a backlash? Because I don't know what to do. I'm waiting for direction. The directions are not coming in from the organizations. And this was fascinating that people were not moving towards a new identity because they were fearful and they were waiting. And the management expected exactly the other way around. When the analysis was done in terms of what are the perception gaps, and this came out with the first thing that we done about when leaders and employees created this identity as to what it is and what should be. It was very clear that the core reason was that the two had never sat down and talked about this concept of identity, about who you are and how you fit in. The focus had always been on systems, on new training programs, new education, new management structures, new project-based organizations. And when this perception gap was done, the new culture, there were three fundamental things that were done to move towards a new culture. There was a very conscious thing, and this lasted for around 2 to 3 months, was a very conscious new behavior definition as to what are the new behaviors which are good and are needed to fulfill my identity so that I can project the right image to the outside world. And the reward system moved from individual contribution to a post-project 360, because a lot of these people are now moving to consulting projects. So new reward system was based on, within that project, a little 360 that was done at the end of a project. And that got introduced into the overall performance management system. So it forced a way of collaborative culture, which was not the case earlier. And another great thing that they continued doing was the quarterly sentiment analytics. Is that, and they still do it, they still do a quarterly sentiment analytics on their Yammer comments that come out, and the 360 feedback that comes out over a period of these the post-project 360s. And what that does is that, if you see, it fundamentally flipped the entire transformation process into asking people to see who you are. How do you see yourself fitting into the new structure or the culture or the strategy of the company, rather than the company telling them, this is my image and this is what I want you to be. And the second theme that really comes out is measurement. And it was a hard journey to find a way to put a number to culture. And this is counterintuitive for a lot of people, saying that, hey, culture is what I touch and feel. How can I put a number to culture? Whereas what people started seeing was that the moment this analytics, so sentiment analytics, they came up with a simple thing saying that, look, on a scale of 1 to 10, people identify themselves at a 7 or an 8 when it comes to collaboration, or how fearful they are of retribution in case they were to display a behavior that is counterproductive to what they're trying to do. And that putting a number down to that sentiment became a huge eye-opener, which fed back into the people that the time that they used to use to identify and visualize their identity. Now, if you were to think about it, an emerging success stories that going on in today's world is Microsoft. What they're discussing is what is their identity, of people's identity, and also their image as who they are in a post-MS Office world. And they call themselves the 98052 bubble. Now, 98052 is the zip code of the headquarters of Microsoft in the US. And what they're questioning is that, are we doing things that will remain inside our bubble, or will we do something that the world really needs? And the culture is now based on three simple principles that they've come up together, which is clarity, energy, and success. People are starting to relate their identity to say, am I providing a sense of clarity within? And again, interestingly enough, that's a trend that we're seeing in a lot of cases, is they've eliminated the ratings, the performance management ratings. They're moving away from annual company meetings to what they call as hackathons. So they do a 1-week hackathon in 60 locations around the world during the time when an annual meeting were to happen, which is directly linking to generating energy. So they're moving the behaviors from just listening to participating. They're using a lot of storytelling to say, what is a fixed mindset? What is a growth mindset? And they are a great analytics firm, and they're using their analytics to do a sentiment analysis and a sentiment measurement as to how are people feeling about this. And lastly, they've come up with a set of inclusive behaviors which were developed by the people to say, this is what good looks like, of how I'm living the values and the principles of the culture. It's an emerging success stories. There is a lot of literature out there which you can go out and read on the internet, but I think it's a fascinating thing to say that they're changing themselves from literally from a service provider, if you will, of just putting some tools out there, to somebody who can really be a transformation partner, and they're using an identity as a fundamental tool to drive that forward. And I will take questions at the end of that. What I would like to see is just last bit is, in my learnings, what are some of the do's and the don'ts about driving identity and cultural transformation? I think if I want to start with the don'ts, I think a lot of mistake people make is they make it into a marketing campaign. It's not a marketing campaign. A culture transformation identity is not a marketing campaign. The other mistake that people make is they only rely on focus groups and offsites. Huge mistake. You need to do that. That there is a part of a focus group. I think a huge part, you could get 30 to 50% of your information and momentum through that, but we miss out the actual people sentiment. People only focus on making big changes. They've stopped thinking about micro behaviors that people use on a day-to-day basis. And what they do is, and this is fascinating, when they do a project, they put a target cultural transformation date, saying that by the end of 2020, I want to be having a new culture. Impossible. Culture is a fluid thing. It evolves continuously, and we can never have a target date. I think what needs to be done is really that have people verbalize identity and behaviors in their own words. Find a way to record those micro behaviors, because these micro behaviors are small things that happen. It could be as simple as how people communicate with each other over email. Something as simple as stupid as that. Do I find a way of ensuring that we don't interrupt ourselves in meetings, or the way I behave with managers? There's some beautiful examples out there. And the last three is really about putting a number to that feeling. Use technology. Today, there are immense technological tools available out there to analyze sentiments, analyze feelings which are hidden, bring that out to people. It could be surveys, but it goes more than surveys. Today, we can have so much data analytics that are available. And more interestingly, and more importantly, is that we need to continuously measure to spot changing tides. Once I've measured it, it's not enough. I need to find a way of monthly, quarterly, whatever way that works for that entire organization to continue to do it, because it's not a project that has a end date. Identity changes, companies' culture changes because they need to fit into a new world. And today's example of COVID is a classic case. What we work today, the way companies work, is going to be looking completely different. So measuring how people are feeling, and more importantly, letting them lead the process of defining their identity is the key thing for you to be able to drive an identity in a cultural transformation. So that's what I had to share with you of my learnings. And again, I'll reiterate, identity is the key to be able to creating a culture where people relate to it and they can move forward. I would love to have your questions or any chat that's coming in to be able to use the last 10 odd minutes appropriately.
Perfect. I think as we are quite a few number of participants today, we can also unmute, use the chat, and we will monitor the chat for questions. If you had any, if anything pops into your mind that you would like to look at. Maybe while we do that, I would go ahead with the first question. So Brijesh, thanks a lot first again for all the insights. I think very, very interesting. Oh, the first question already comes in from Dagmar. Do you see some values and beliefs that are common to successful companies? An interesting one.
Yeah, beautiful question, Dagmar. The value or the belief, I would like to start with belief. The belief is about the creation of my company's value collaboratively. So collaboration, if I were to go back to it, is the fundamental value and belief which why some of the companies will continue to remain successful. That's the one. Of course, client centricity, agile. I don't know of any company which says, I don't want to be agile or I do not want to be successful. But I think this collaboration culture is really key for us to be able to see. The value of collaboration is the key for us to be able to move forward and remain successful. Next question from Christian. It says, how do you include diversity when you work together to define identity bottom up? Again, beautiful, Christian. And if you think about it, the example that I gave from Microsoft, diversity is something that they did not have to forcibly bring into the place, because they said that the entire organization, using certain, of course, segments, would need to come up and identify to create their identity. Now, what that does is automatically ensures that diversity is a concept that comes in. That's what I think. But of course, in certain organizations in today's world, Black Lives Matters and so on and so forth, it becomes a huge issue because diversity relates directly to collaboration. So if that is a sentiment that you see coming up within your organization, I think it's a very important thing to put in. What I would always guard companies against or people against is stop becoming a Me Too movement. It's a bit like everybody's talking about diversity, so I need to put diversity at the top of the agenda, because sometimes it pisses people off. But you are the judge. It's again the sentiment that you need to judge. I'll take another small example. Is that right now I work with companies, and companies are coming to us with saying that, hey, train people on diversity. I said, why? Have you really gathered as to why do you need to do that? The next question, if I move forward, David, it says, a small startup business, how best do you hire for identity? Fantastic. I can give you an answer of a startup in of course in Silicon Valley, where they say that if you're applying for a position, you don't send your CV in, you write an essay. It's literally an essay, and they give 500 words for it, to say that how will you add to my company's culture. On their website, they have their leadership team and a few people talking about what they do, company culture, and they just come back and say, I don't want your CV. Tell me how you're going to add to the company. And it forces people's creative side to come up and add to that. So hopefully that's one way, David, you could perhaps use that. Again, happy to connect offline. Jean-Luc says, how to tackle middle management resistance to cultural transformation. So Jean-Luc, if I had a penny for every time we face this challenge of middle management, I would be a multi-billionaire, right? The key is really this self-creation and this collaborative creation. Is yes, middle management is always seen as as a so-called roadblock, but that's because a lot of times they don't feel included in creation of that identity. They're seen as stuck between, the management and the answer is simple: inclusion in self-creation of what their identity looks like. And then they're not the stoppers of the flow, but they really are the one who are adding to the entire value of creation. I hope that answers your question, John-Luc. Otherwise, feel free to drop in a line. If I move forward to David's, he says, for me, it's clear that creating identity also starts with recruiting the right people. Hence, this needs a clearly defined target culture to do so. What's your experience for advice for companies in this field? Let me see if I've got the question right. So what you're saying is that identity depends on hiring the right people, and that means it's a clear target culture. Like I said, there are two ways that you can go about this, David. First is when you are talking to people as a part of the hiring process, talk about what the company's culture and the expected behaviors are. And this links back to GE, again, a fascinating company that I worked with, as I mentioned before. Jack Welch had a saying: hire for values and train for skills. That encompasses every single thing in one go, saying when you are talking to people, are you hiring them because they have a skill? You can find loads of skilled people out there. But are you having a conversation about values? Now, here's the challenge in having a conversation about values. People would agree to you. Always. Nobody in an interview process wants to disagree with you. And if I may take a digression, I firmly believe, and some people don't like this thing, is that an interview is a discussion between two liars, if you will, right? So there's a company which is trying to project an aspirational image of what that company is. And here's an interviewee or a candidate who's trying to project an image of who they are. And there's an aspirational mismatch. And best companies, what they do is they continue to talk about saying, tell me your real feelings, move beyond skills to say, why do you want to do it? It's like what Simon Sinek says, in his book, The Infinite Game, start with why. Why is it that you want to join my company? Forget about this nice title. Tell me, how will this add to you as Brijesh? How will you as Brijesh add or improve my image or my identity? And that's a discussion. And David, it's easier said than done, right? Because we are so attuned when we hire people to talk about skills, talk about achievements. And to me, that's one of the biggest things that needs to be taken care of, is to how do we manage that discussion? As I said, easier to say than do. Try including that in your discussion. Do that.
Perfect. I think so. Maybe do we have time for one more?
I do.
And maybe do a short answer.
Sure. The last one is, does the traditional hierarchical structure limit culture and identity? I've seen companies that, holacracy, David, is a fascinating thing, right? That's a concept that's coming out, and a lot of companies are going out and doing that. But the question then becomes, what is traditional? You can create holacracy within your team. For instance, ZKB is a company that I work with, and there are a few other organizations. What they're doing is they're adopting a concept of rotating leadership within their company, within their teams. Holacracy, right? You can yourself have a chance to create that holacracy because you're saying, what is my identity as a team? Is my identity resting on one person who's the manager, or a shared values system or a belief system that I'm driving? Perhaps that it's a short answer to a very fundamental question, David, but to me, that's a simple way to do it. We think management structures restrict us. They don't. It's because we follow them rather than challenge and do something about it. To me,
Perfect.
That's what I have to say.
Thank you very much, Brijesh. I would like to do two things before we maybe jump.
Okay.
Number one is I added again the link that would be some feedback questions to the webinar. Then I would like to just quickly share a little bit what we are doing at Advisor AG, which is pretty much, as our claim, improve your digital collaboration using AI. And as Brijesh mentioned before, collaboration is also something that we see as a core element to really move a company forward. It's everything to strengthen relationship, which will in the end impact your culture. And what we are addressing here is really in two ways with the Microsoft add-in that we created and is available for Outlook for everyone for free just to download, but also in Word if we work with other companies. And it's really an in-context support system to create behaviors or micro behaviors, as you mentioned, Brijesh, to focus on the right tone, to make sure that you are clear and compact. But also here at the bottom, we called it now culture cards. In this version is really giving hints in the go again and again, just to reminding and creating that awareness to do so. And the second aspect is that's coming soon in the general public version, where we look at the contribution to the company culture overall, where everyone basically sees how they have been moving, how they have been contributing in that respect. As mentioned, this is for free to download if you are interested to do so. Basically, you just go either maybe the easiest way is just to go on our homepage. There you will see the link to the add-in. And if you have quickly time, I added the link again to just give us the feedback on today's session. We can always want to get better and more meaningful. So here, the first question is around if it's working. I'm not sure if you can see it on the link. I pasted the link just again in the chat. Like how useful was the lecture today? Was it also actionable? Is there something you take away and maybe think you can implement in the next few weeks or months? And also the length, if a 1 hour session is a good way to go about this. We only have 3 answers so far. You can also now, I think, progress at your own speed. Reappears for me. Oh, that's strange. Maybe you just click next with skipping it if that's the issue. I just made it now available that you can progress at your own speed. Just click next. If that happens to be the case. And then the last question is really, what was the most meaningful element today? That's also interesting to just know what has been really meaningful and successful for you in the session today. With that, I would like to thank everyone for joining us, especially also Brijesh for the wonderful presentation and sharing his vast knowledge base on creating identities that then make successful culture. Thank you very much. And wishing everyone a great afternoon or whatever time it is where you are dialing in from. See you around soon.
All right. Thanks, everyone.